Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer, and this is Gospel Minded. Happy Easter. We've made it. We're at the finish line, and we're celebrating today. We're going to spend the next few minutes talking about our behavioral health, our emotions, psychology, especially as these topics are relevant to the gospel reading Sunday after Sunday. And so, as always, this isn't supposed to be a substitute for going to church or doing counseling or spiritual direction or any of those kinds of practices. But we know that the psychological world and the spiritual world so often go hand in hand in our lives. And isn't that the truth today, as here we are celebrating Easter Sunday? So, happy Easter. The gospel this morning stood out to me, and I want to read part of it because it has a lot of relevance to things that you and I experience every day of our lives, and that is emotions, emotional expression that we have as human beings. So the gospel today comes from John chapter 20. It says, "Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, 'They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him.' And then Peter and the other disciple, John, by tradition, run to the tomb, and they see that the stone is in fact moved, and they don't find the body of Jesus, but instead only the burial clothes." And then the gospel goes on, beginning with verse 11, Mary Magdalene standing at the tomb. Now, we didn't hear this in today's gospel, but this is how the gospel goes on. It says, "But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. And as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had laid, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, 'Woman, why are you weeping?' She said to them, 'Because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him.'" Wow. And then it goes on, and then it's, of course, the Lord Jesus himself who presents himself to Mary in that moment. But holy smokes, what a whirlwind. So let's just take a second and appreciate what has gone on the last few days for the apostles and the Virgin Mary up to this point. So put yourself in the feet of the characters in today's gospel. Here we have Peter. So let's imagine the emotions that he's feeling. Probably some guilt and perhaps even shame for denying the Lord 3 times. Probably anger. Confusion, perhaps today now. Mary Magdalene is saying the body of the Lord has been taken away. The stone has been moved. What? What is that all about? John the Evangelist here in the gospel, that beloved disciple whom Jesus loved, probably thinking the same things that Peter is, perhaps some of the confusion, the wonderment, the awe, perhaps still feeling a sense of honor, responsibility that just a few days before from the cross, Jesus said to him, "Behold your mother," and the Virgin Mary went into his house. Put yourself in the feet of the Virgin Mary, who just days before this watched her son tortured, despised by men, ridiculed, crucified on the cross, and died. Imagine that kind of heartache, that kind of grief. So if you've been celebrating the Triduum these past few days, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and then the Easter Vigil going into today, Easter Sunday, we're talking about an emotional roller coaster. Certainly 2,000 years ago, those who were close to Jesus experienced it. Perhaps you experienced celebrating this Triduum liturgy, but the truth of the matter is that all of us, because we are human beings, experience a lot of different emotions a lot of times. And it can be kind of rapid firing, as was the situation for these characters, these figures in the gospel today. One day, sadness, hurt, anger, resentment, distress. The next day, confusion, wonderment, awe, surprise, joy. Holy smokes, varying and diverse emotions. So let's transition now. Emotions. Holy smokes. I love talking about emotions because it's not exactly a set in stone, this is how we explain emotion. There are a lot of theories in the history of psychology about what emotion is, what mood is, what affect is. So just sort of generally speaking, when we talk about emotion, we're talking about these sort of perhaps fleeting sensations that we have, and they can come and go sometimes quickly, whereas our mood tends to be more pervasive, can last longer, and reflect some of these emotions that we exhibit. And those are both distinguished from what we talk about as being the affect, which is the outward manifestation of what we may be feeling, of what our mood might be, or what emotions we might be experiencing. We talk about incongruence when some of these aren't necessarily aligned, and so we might be experiencing one emotion or feeling one thing, but we might show something else outward on our face or in our body language. I think a great example is in the Olympics, watching figure skaters in the Winter Olympics. You know, if they slip on the ice a time or two or mess up, they've spent so long preparing and rehearsing their performance, and they finish their set, and you know that they're frustrated deep down and disappointed that they didn't do better. But at the end of the music, they're there posing and smiling as though nothing is wrong. But you know, underneath of that, there's some emotion churning, which is not congruent with what their body language demonstrates. So that's just an example. But the truth is that there are times when our emotions may not necessarily map up what we manifest outwardly. And so we could talk on and on and on about our feelings, our emotions, our mood, our affect. And again, just know that there are a lot of theories that none of them are exactly set in stone. But one thing that I have found helpful is an image by Russell, and I'll have it here on the screen. What I like about this is, first of all, that it's kind of simple, and the idea is that there is the two axes here. There's the X and Y axis, and we've got valence and arousal. And I like the arousal piece because there tends to be some sort of physiological aspect to our emotions. Is that not true? When you feel sad, are you not physiologically aroused? Perhaps tears. We might furrow our eyebrow if we're angry. There's a biological component to this. And so this graph is really kind of interesting because it shows when there's negative valence and negative arousal, we can be in that continuum where we're sad, depressed, or bored. Whereas when we have that negative valence and there's the positive arousal, we might feel distressed or angry or tense. And when the valence is on the other side and that arousal is high, perhaps we could be feeling alert, excited, happy, or content, relaxed, or calm if there's less arousal. Now, a very relevant criticism to this is that this is not an exhaustive list at all of the emotions that we might experience. I mean, just to name a few, it doesn't have on there pride, amusement, awe, annoyed, gratitude, envious, joy, confusion, surprise, anxiety, disgust, love. So many of these relevant and important emotions that we experience aren't mentioned at all here. But what do we do when we are experiencing some kind of emotion, because you know what it's like when you are emotional and it's hard to get out of that tailspin if it's a negative emotion or an upsetting or an uncomfortable emotion. The sadness, the anxiety, especially if it's pervasive, it can feel challenging sometimes to get out of bed, to have energy. It can mess up our thoughts. Our emotions impact the way we think. It can have an impact on the things that we do or choose not to do. So when we are experiencing emotions, what should we do? What can we do to try and help us understand them, unpack them, work with them, work through them? For one thing, I think naming the emotion in your mind, calling it out for what it is. I feel angry right now. I feel sad right now. I feel happy right now. Content. Whatever the emotion is, especially if you notice it impacting you, call it out. Name it for what it is. You can validate that emotion. Emotions in and of themselves are not good or bad. They're emotions. And so to validate that I'm feeling this way, and it's okay for me to feel this way right now. Then what we can do is start to transition into a mindfulness and try and understand some of where that's coming from and try and focus on the here and now instead of dwelling on whatever the trigger was or whatever the thing was that cued this emotion to start in the first place. And then talking about our emotions, talking about it with a friend, a loved one, a spouse, a counselor, a therapist. Believe it or not, talking about our emotions plays such a critical role in helping us work through them and understanding the impact that they have in our lives. Other things that can be helpful are journaling, writing it down, noticing when you need to take a break from whatever to kind of process the emotions that you're experiencing. Good sleep. Our sleep impacts our mood, our emotions, our affect. Very helpful to be able to get good sleep. So here we are, Easter Sunday. I hope that you're experiencing contentment, that you are excited, that you're happy, because this is a great day. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. There are times that we aren't always going to feel like rejoicing. Our emotions can fluctuate. We can experience a lot of emotions that vary all the time. That's okay. But the more we know about our emotions, the more we understand them, the more we are practiced up in talking through them, understanding the role that they play and how they impact me day to day, the better off we're going to be as human beings. So I hope this has been useful for you, and I wish you and your families a happy Easter. I'll see you next time on Gospel Minded. I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Take care.